Alrighty, on this episode of Faith and Focus, I am very honored to have I can't just say an online friend because we have technically met in person, but an online friend, Abby Libby. And the reason why I'm very excited to talk to her is because, unbeknownst to us, our lives intersect over something that's pretty important, pretty central to my life. And we'll get into that in this episode, so I hope you enjoy it. Alrighty, well, as I said in that intro, I'm very excited to speak to Abby Libby, but just some housekeeping stuff. Again, if you want to support this ministry within faith, it's more than just this podcast. Obviously, I do in-person ministry as well. I have my online counseling where I do biblical counseling for people who maybe can't afford counseling in person. Maybe they can't afford really expensive counseling, but that's what I have my master's degree in, so I offer that as part of my ministry as well. It's all donation-based, and some people can't give anything. So sometimes your monthly donation can go to support someone's counseling session that maybe they can't afford to pay themselves. So you can text the word discipleship to 41444. And of course, as always, I have to shill for my YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, like and share over there as well. Comment, leave reviews. Those things really do kind of help. I don't know what it does with the algorithm. It does something, and it causes more people to get eyes on the show. So that is very helpful. So I appreciate that. But as I said, today I have Abby Libby. And of course, last week we had PJ Williams, who was the co-host of Conspiracy Pilled, and we got talking about Nephilim. But this is the other host of Conspiracy Pilled with PJ, Abby Libby. And as I said, our lives dovetail in a pretty significant way. That way is New Tribes Mission. So without further ado, Abby Libby, thank you for coming on Faith and Focus.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a while. We talked about it a couple months ago, the idea of me coming on. So I'm excited.
Yeah. No, and I knew I wanted to talk to you because we got to meet for an afternoon, last summer, you and PJ, and that's when I found out PJ and I live only about 20 miles away. But you had come into town and a bunch of other online friends came into town. And just in talking, I found out you are, we'll use a lot of acronyms. That's kind of a New Tribes thing. And we'll even call it probably New Tribes because Abby's era was when it was called New Tribes Mission. When I was with New Tribes Bible Institute, it was called New Tribes Mission. Now it's Ethnos 360. So please forgive me, anyone with Ethnos, for us calling it NTM. But we'll also probably use the phrase MK, which stands for Missionary Kid. Not MK Ultra, which is probably something that Abby and PJ have gotten into on Conspiracy Pilled. So, Abby, I found out you were a missionary kid, and we didn't get to talk about it too much. So I thought, let's talk about it on this episode of Faith and Focus, because I have a lot of friends who I went to Bible school with, who are missionaries with New Tribes Mission and other things. So I think just hearing your experience will be a lot of fun for them. So go ahead and introduce yourself. I always give the floor to the guests to share as much as you want. You can share how you came to faith in Christ. Your story, where you're at now with Christ, all that kind of stuff. But obviously we'll start getting into your experience as an MK and in your relationship with New Tribes Mission, what your parents did. So take it away.
Yeah. Okay. So my name's Abby, born Abby Brooks, but I'm married to Libby. So I'm Abby Libby. You can find me on Twitter as my big platform. And then I co-host a conspiracy show with PJ Williams, who you met last week. And that's a lot of fun. I grew up on the New Tribes Mission campuses, the three campuses.
Yeah,
the Bible Institute, the Language Institute.
Yeah,
and then one more.
I don't know when it there's such weird circles because there's New Tribes Canada, which is kind of different.
Yeah.
There's in America, there was something out in Pennsylvania. There's the headquarters in Florida. There's a school in Wisconsin. There was one in Jackson. There's a school in Missouri. So they're kind of all over the place, and they close.
Yeah,
and
they're
they
all,
open.
yeah.
So I don't know what was around when you were a kid, but
okay. Let's see. I was. My parents were going to a Bible school in Michigan. Did they have a place in Michigan?
Yeah, that's the Bible school I went to in Jackson, Michigan, down near Ann Arbor.
Jackson. Okay.
Yep.
So they were going to Bible school in Michigan when I was born. I was born actually when they were on Christmas break.
Oh, nice.
I came like 5 weeks early, and my first crib was a drawer because they were not at their home.
Right.
They were on Christmas break with my mom's parents. But so I I was basically born right onto that New Tribes Bible Institute. And then we went to the one in Kentucky, which may
Okay.
not be
Yeah, I don't think that one's. I think.
Whitesburg-ish.
Okay. Yeah, I think that one might be defunct now. I'm not sure.
I
Maybe they
think
moved to
so.
Missouri at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah. Well, so my
Oh,
sister was born in Kentucky, and
okay.
then we went to Missouri, the
Oh,
Missouri one.
gotcha.
So, and the Missouri one's the one I remember the most, and we've gone back and visited a
Sure.
couple times. So I remember going to preschool in Missouri. I remember that campus has these like big retaining ponds for like sewage.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
remember those big green gross ponds.
Yeah, no, they're kind of
Um,
centrally located too. Like,
yeah, it's a
I didn't go
picture.
to Missouri, but like, and I don't know how if you've been back since, and I don't know the evolution of the campus, but like my memory, you kind of come into campus and there's like a hill off to your left, and there's the lake down to the right,
Hmm,
and you
hmm.
kind of weave through campus, and like as you're weaving through, the ponds are like right in the center, like they're
Right.
right there. So you can swim in the lake or you can swim in this nest pond.
Yeah.
But now they have housing like all on the other side of that. That's kind of like
Yeah.
encircled this pond or whatever. And I don't even know if that pond's still there. I think they might have filled it in
They might have
actually.
gotten rid of it.
Yeah.
About time. It was
Sorry.
it was one of those like gross and charming
Sure.
things because it was like this bright green blue. Anyway, I have a lot of memories of those. So we did our we did that piece of the training, and then I think while you're at that Missouri school is when my parents did this we have to go out into the woods, like bush training.
Mm.
Um like a glorified camping trip for missionaries.
Yeah.
We had to live out there for I think a month. We had to live out
Yeah.
in the woods for a month.
Yeah. I had a friend who went through and it was like 6 weeks. But I
Yeah.
think that it might have gotten scaled back to only a week or two now or something like that. So it probably was somewhere in between. I could
Wow.
imagine building a house. You had to build a house out of
Yeah,
stuff
exactly.
in the woods and plastic and duct tape and stuff. And then a week later, I don't know, I guess it's like a Jewish temporary shelters festival or something like that. But how old were you when your parents were in Missouri? You said preschool, but
Uh 3 into 4
okay,
that year.
okay,
And then they wrapped up and we went back to my hometown, home church area, and that's where I did all of K4.
mm,
Um and that whole year it was like, when are we going to Africa? When are we going to Africa? Because I knew at that age that was our whole goal. We were waiting for a placement, we were gathering support, all that stuff.
yeah,
So basically just from whenever I was born, I knew that we were a missionary family and that's what we were gearing up for. And we got our placement. So when I was 5, we went over to Ivory Coast, West Africa,
okay.
or Cote d'Ivoire. It's one of the only countries that is recognized by its French name by the UN.
Oh, interesting.
Most countries, even if they have like a name in French or another language that like translates,
Hmm. Okay.
they're known by their English name, but not that one. Anyway, so we were in Yamoussoukro, which is the capital, not the biggest city, but the capital of Ivory Coast. We lived there for 2.5 years.
Okay. So you're still under 10, right? You're probably 6,
Yeah,
7, 8,
yeah,
something like that.
yeah. 5 to 7 is that first
Okay.
stint. And after that 2.5 years, they tried to do an election, and it really failed. There was a military coup, and then the country just erupted in civil war. And we were in a really, really difficult position where we're sitting in the country. We've been there it's our home. We've been there for a
Right.
while. And then all of a sudden, the country's just blowing up, and very unsafe. And for whatever reason that I can't say I completely understand, the mission schools throughout the country became kind of hot spots for this military activity. I don't know if they were just like really well like kept, so they ended up being places that were fought over, but there were schools up farther north that were like shooting and all that. And so we had a bunch of missionaries that had to from various, not even just NTM, but just various organizations, were evacuated down and stayed at our school.
Okay.
And then the UN troops commandeered our school for their base. So we've got like all these refugees and all these troops. And I remember the troops looking at my parents like, "What are you doing with kids here
Sure.
in this country right now. What are you doing? And my parents are like, we don't know what's going. Like, we're just missionaries. We're just sitting and waiting for like the NTM to make a call about it,
Right.
which is basically where we were at,
Yeah.
waiting for people to make a decision about like, is this going to blow over? Is this going to be safe to sit here?
Sure.
Or do we have to, because it costs a lot of money to evacuate a whole field, and you lose a lot. You lose
Yeah.
a lot of everything.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I have a lot of friends who, just as a side note like, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of, I don't want to say politics, but with
mhm.
mission organizations like that, they now they will people people will kind of complain that, like, and I don't know what New Tribes policy was then. Sometime when I was in Bible school, I know they had made a shift. They would usually let you go if you had like 30% of your support. Hardly any money,
Mm,
but you're like, we're living in Africa. How much does it cost? We'll just go.
right.
And eventually they were like, you can't do that anymore. You have to have like a 75% or something like that. Which some people would say, well, where's the trusting of God and all of that? But from a
Mm,
practical standpoint, I think what they're thinking was there were so many experiences like that where if you go there and you can live there, but in the event that you have to be evacuated out, the mission then ends up eating that cost. Like, part of what people don't understand or appreciate is that those foreign missionaries, like, I've got missionaries who live in Papua New Guinea, and it's like,
mhm.
we need $8,000 a month. It's like, what you're making more money than I do, and you're living in a jungle. But what they don't appreciate is that is like a lot of that is just going into an account to pay for a flight out of a jungle if they break a leg, or if something happens, or
Yep.
if civil war erupts. So like, a lot of that is just like, we don't know what to do. We were kind of waiting on the mission, and yeah, there's a lot of chaos surrounding that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
The day-to-day is real cheap, and the emergencies are real expensive.
Right.
And this was a big part of our story, because I think we were about 25% of our we weren't nearly at half. We were at like 25,
Sure.
30% of our recommended support. And that wasn't something we really felt day to day. I know that we kind of did fewer fun things, going out to eat, stuff like that, than the other missionaries who were at full support, but we didn't feel it until we evacuated. And then it was like we were destitute. Like, we just got nothing to start over, nothing to um yeah, it's a situation.
Yeah.
Let's see where yeah, so we sat there, I think we sat there for about a week in Yamoussoukro, just with the UN peacekeepers and with everything that was going on. And then the battle lines got within a mile
Hmm.
of where we were. And New Tribes was like, this isn't good.
Mm-hmm.
So we evacuated down to the coast to Abidjan. There's a Bible college there, run by nationals,
Hmm.
that allowed us to come, and we lived there for 2 weeks. We just sat there and waited to see if we could go back home, and then they finally made the call to get us out. So that was the first time.
Yeah.
And we went back to the States. I remember. Oh, let's see.
And can I just interject? Can I just
Yeah.
interject really quick? Just because, like, another thing to like explain to people is like, that's another thing that I think people wrestle with sometimes is they think, and I am guilty of this sometimes too. Is like, okay, you've got a missionary family, you've got a family that's going to pack up and they're going to go to Africa, or they're going to go to Indonesia or Papua New Guinea or the Philippines,
Yeah.
and the romantic view of that is like, we are completely immersing ourselves, we are becoming these people, and then at the, like, okay, we got polio, or not polio, malaria, we're
Yeah.
leaving, bye. And it's like, well, malaria and hunger and sickness, that's a part of their life. If you want to completely immerse yourself in your culture, you need to do that. So like, I think sometimes people hear it's like, well, why would you leave
Yeah.
at the first sign of hardship? Isn't struggles and tribulations supposed to be part of, not that missionaries are
Yeah.
only the ones required to go through that kind of stuff, but people kind of wonder about that. But just kind of explain, like you're talking international organizations with, they have to follow
Hmm.
international laws, international
Hmm.
treaties, all of this kind of stuff. And the flip side of that is like, New Tribes Mission or any international organization has to make that call from a standpoint of, you think of the Gracia Burnham story, which I'm sure you're
Yes,
probably
I've met
familiar
her.
with. Like, oh
I've
yeah,
met her. Yeah.
she spoke at the Bible school that
Yeah.
probably 4 or 5 years after her capture, which If you haven't
Yeah.
seen, you can read In the Presence of Mine Enemies, or Netflix has a show called
Yeah.
Captive. I think that one of the episodes features her story, and that's one of the things is like an organization like that can't, if you are captured by insurgents or anything like that, New Tribes Mission or the organization can't pay for your ransom to get you back out, because that just
Yeah.
incentivizes guerrilla and militia groups to just capture Americans from these groups,
Yeah.
and they'll just, so New Tribes Mission has, scores of people there, and they have to make that call, like, do we let them stay there? What if they all get captured? What if they get killed?
Yeah.
Like, what if we
Yeah.
have American people there and now they get killed? Now the American military has to go in, or maybe not, but then they look bad, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
so people look at that and they think it's not just you, it's
Yeah.
this whole organization has to make a call, and there's a whole bunch of reasons. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
It's very complex. I remember because there were definitely hardships that we went through that we were not removed for. Like there's a lady on our team, a good friend of my mom's, who passed from malaria. She didn't realize it was malaria soon enough. She didn't get help soon enough, and just took her.
Yeah.
And stuff like that happens, and then there's like the day-to-day, just watching out for poisonous snakes, and just a level of danger that you live with and you get used to. But then there's like, you're in a war zone and you're about to have little kids in the middle of a war zone. And I think that I don't think I've ever considered that New Tribes made the wrong call there, and I don't think I've ever had anybody suggest to my family that we should have stayed in the middle of that.
Right.
But yeah, we came back to Maine for a couple years. We visited all our supporters again. I think we increased our support. We kind of waited for the country to cool down. And then when I was 9, we went back. It seemed like everything was stable. Same place. Okay. Yep. Same house. A lot of our stuff was gone. But
oh boy, that's like, I'm picturing like like people that have it, I'm sure it's true of where you're at, but like in Michigan, it's like northern Michigan or the UP, people will have like cabins up there that you don't go to from October through April, and like they go up there and like a bear has like, I mean, sometimes it's people that vandalize, but a bear has like burst in and just ripped the whole place apart, and I'm just thinking like you guys come back to you, it's like, oh, it's been a few years, let's go back to our home, and it's just completely ripped to shreds.
It wasn't too bad because we had a couple, we have had a lot of nationals who were friends of the mission, and they try to keep an eye on things, but there were definitely things that were gone. Yeah. And that was to be expected. We were like, yeah, they're probably going to take some stuff as payment, or things kind of have a way of walking off.
Sure.
But yeah, we went back to the same place when we were 9. And just to, when we evacuated, we can only take a couple suitcases. It's not like we were able to take much with us. So almost everything we owned was still there. And we were only there when I was 9 for 3 months before the country was even worse the second time. Let's see. How many people went back
I mean, I know the teams aren't necessarily that tightly, but like there's usually groups of people that, and teams and stuff. Like, were you guys one of the few that went back, or?
There was, I want to say there was a solid 20 or so that went back. Okay. And then there were some people there the second time who were, they had moved from a different country to ours, switcheroos of placements. Sure. There were a couple families who they wanted to come back, but whatever health things with their kids didn't allow them to come back. So there was some. I remember being sad when we got back at how many people didn't join back with us, but then there were some like exciting new families that had joined. And then another thing that was different the second time was a lot of our tribal placements were still inaccessible. So a lot of people came back who had been placed in the tribes, but they came back to the school area, to Yamoussoukro, where things were more secure, and they would go up on day trips through the military, because the UN still had a presence dividing the country, and then the rebels were up top, and the established government was in the south, and the UN French UN line was keeping it peaceful, I guess.
Pretty well at bay.
Yeah. So they were, we would go up and we would visit our churches up there, but no one was able to live up there. So those families were down with us, which was really special.
Hmm.
They were some of my best friends when I was there. Let's see. So what happened was, for whatever reason, the established government, the Ivorian military, bombed the UN line.
Oh, well, that's never good.
That's not, yeah. Yeah. And I remember hearing it. It was close enough to hear it. The country's only like the size of New Mexico. So we're living kind of middle south half, and they're bombing like that middle line, so we could hear
What
it.
was the? Do you know what was the incentive? Because it was the rebels who were up north. The UN
Mhm.
was keeping the established government established, right? What was the incentive for them doing that? Was it a intentional thing, or was it they just?
They said it was an accident.
Oh, okay.
I think they were, it seemed pretty obvious to everyone involved, including the UN, who tried that president for war crimes later.
Usually, that's pretty serious.
The Ivorians wanted to take out the rebels. They wanted to be able to
Okay.
push that line back, and the UN wasn't having it.
Gotcha.
And so they're like, these white men are interfering. We're just going to bomb them and
Get
see
them out
what
of here.
happens. So the UN, of course, was not pleased by this. And they said, okay, well, then we're going to bomb your planes.
Ooh.
And their planes were in my town. So one night we're just
Were those planes
doing
also your evacuation?
no, no.
Okay.
Well, no. They
That sounds like an international cluster that would happen. It would be like the UN are there protecting, in theory, international
well, it
peace,
was a cluster.
and then they bomb the established government instead of the rebels. And in bombing them, they bomb the evacuation of the people that maybe they're there to protect. It would just
They
seem like
definitely
general political incompetence.
it was. So what happened? They bombed those planes that night. We could hear it was so loud. It's like they're dropping bombs, and we could go out. We could see the bombs falling out of the planes, right in our town,
Jeez.
not far off. And we're like, what is happening? And
And you're
the
still like 10 at
locals,
this time, 9, 10.
yeah, yeah. 9, yeah. And then the locals freak out and they start just like firing off guns in the streets into the air, but just so there's like all this shooting outside our house and bombs coming down. We're like, what is happening? And one of the things as a New Tribes missionary, and I think most missionaries, but it's definitely part of the New Tribes model, is that you always keep a go bag. We always had stuff ready to go. And there was a big conversation that night. Like, do we just sit here and wait to get shot?
Sure.
Or do we grab our bags and go? And if we grab our bags and go, where do we go?
Right.
And I remember that conversation as a 9-year-old, and I'm like, what?
Now, I don't know how old you are, and I don't necessarily want to like age you or date you, but like what year approximately is this? You're 9 years old, but what year is it? Still in the 90s or?
This is 2004,
Oh,
I
so
think.
this is post 9/11. So this is
Yeah. Yep.
okay.
Because 9/11 happened while we were there the first time.
Okay.
Because I remember hearing it on BBC radio.
Oh.
That's how we found out about 9/11.
Okay.
Yeah. Because that's the radio station we could get. We couldn't get anything from the States, but we got BBC. Yeah. So that night was so confusing. And I remember my parents dragged out a mattress and had my sister and I sleep between 2 concrete walls so that there was no chance of like a stray bullet coming through. And they pretty much stayed up all night packing.
Jeez.
And it was about a week of just sitting in our compound because it had walls, and we made the decision that like this is going to be the safest place for us to be.
Mm-hmm.
But because the French white UN men had bombed the Ivorian planes, the perception of Ivorians was that the white people are our enemies.
Oh, sure.
So what they did made it, like you said, a cluster that was immediately very dangerous for the people that they were supposed to be there to protect.
Sure.
Yeah, so we couldn't go out anywhere. People were killed for being white.
Hmm.
In other areas where things were more tense, people's businesses were destroyed, even in our town, if they were white,
Wow.
or even if their store was just like had a French name.
Sure.
There was a bookstore called Librairie de France, and it was run by an Ivorian man, but it was completely destroyed, books
Wow.
torn up in the street because he
Jeez.
had any type of. So we were like, this is bad. This is real bad, but we don't have like a good way out. Even though we know we need to get out, we don't have a good path. And it was about a week. And then the Ivorian military was like, we kind of did this, so we're going to kind of take responsibility to work with the UN to get these people out. So they came in to our compound with a bus, and they loaded us all in the bus. Ivorian men with machine guns, and guarded us all the way to their little airport.
Yeah.
And then the Brits sent in a Hercules cargo plane,
Wow.
and we just all sat on our suitcases in
this
hold of this cargo plane.
This is all the 20, 30 missionary families that had went back, and then now they're leaving
Yep.
again. Okay. Wow.
Yep. We're all crammed in this very, very hot cargo plane, and they flew us to Ghana. We got refugee status in Ghana. I have my passport. I have like a little refugee visa. And
what is your perception as a 9-year-old girl of this? Are you having like, is it like, oh, this is just a family vacation as a missionary kid? Or are you very conscious of like, like this is a terrifying experience? Like what was that? And maybe it's hard to think back and engage it as an adult now, like what you were thinking as a child. But what were you thinking during all this?
Even the first time when I was 7, I had a concept of the weight of it, because we had that whole week of like, there are refugees coming in, they're in trouble, we're going to need to help them. And then realizing that like, I'm becoming that person, like the people we were just taking care of. I'm that person now.
I'm that person.
That's me. Yep. So the second time I was like, oh, I know all about this. Like I knew what the whole thing was and what it meant at 9, because I had already done it at 7. And so we stayed a couple weeks in Ghana, and I got very sick. And we finally got a flight back to the States, and I was pretty much immediately in the hospital with typhoid.
Wow. I mean, at least you made it back to the States.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was one of those blessings that it was like, that's not a thing. That is not a thing you want to have and go to an Ivorian hospital for.
Well, and especially your parents. You said your mom had a friend who
died
of something
that
was
malaria.
Treatable, but
yeah,
depending on when you get it, where you get it, and how soon it's treated, it may not be.
Yeah. Wow. So even with American medicine, I was on IV for like 3 weeks. Wow. For that, because it did go quite a while before getting treated. Just the span of time that we were just in limbo and unable to even go to a doctor was kind of a lot, that it built up in my system quite a bit. And that was it. So we, after getting back at 9, NTM decided to scrap the whole field. They were like, we did our absolute best. They'll still send in somebody to minister to the churches, check on the churches. But what we found when we went back that second time was that the Nationals really had like established themselves and taken good care of those churches and understood.
That's good.
Yeah. And so nothing was really lost. It was almost like God was like, you should spend your resources elsewhere, because this country is okay. They're taken care of. There's enough people here who know the gospel and are able to spread it without your help. So, yeah.
And that is always, I think a missionary's objective is to work themselves out of a job. That's what they always say is,
exactly,
we don't want to be needed here anymore. And if you're not, then why keep going back to a war zone?
Exactly. And it kept being a war zone for a long, long time. When I was 10, we went to the NTM Institute in Missouri for a week-long refresher course, debrief thing with a lot of other missionaries. And that's where I met Gracia. So I got to be with her for a week, and she really, she was really kind to my sister and I, and understood that we had been through not the same type of trauma, but there was a connection there over that sort of mission field trauma. And yeah, that was the last I was really involved with NTM. We wanted to do another placement. We were really looking at Senegal for a while, and it I think it just became clear that it wasn't what God wanted for us,
Mm,
and we were trying to force something that wasn't our calling anymore. So
yeah.
we ended up staying in the States, and then my dad became an elder at our local church, and then later he took a pastorate in the next town over, and that was it.
How did your parents deal with that? Like, I mean, has it been talked about? Like, I don't know how much your parents talk about, like, because that's kind of a. I mean, you mentioned it's a trauma. It's not as traumatic as being kidnapped for a year and
Right.
but like, trauma is relative to a certain extent, and then there's different, and there's
Mhm.
what counselors call like unspoken trauma or unrecognized trauma.
Mhm.
People that retire, lose a job, miscarriages are often one of those things because it's not
Mhm.
felt. People don't recognize it. Like, that's a dream and a hope and a calling from God, and to just see
Mhm.
it twice, just and now it's like, well, what do we do? Like,
Yeah.
how did your parents seem to handle that?
It was interesting watching them. I think that when I talked to them, they said that for them, the second time going back was closure.
Mm,
For me, that was like a second layer of like
yeah,
horrible experience. But for
sure.
them, it really did help bring closure to their missionary experience.
Mm, okay.
To be able to go back for a few months, see the impact of the work that they had done prior. So I think that a lot of the adults found that second time good. And I know a lot of it we just never really talked about. I think it was
Sure.
just one of those like, how do you what are we going to accomplish by talking about it kind of things.
Sure.
I know that financially we basically never recovered.
Mm,
Um, my parents were able to finally buy their first house, a little tiny house, after I graduated high school. It's
mm,
just kind of the financial situation that we were always in.
wow. Yeah.
Getting set back that much twice, I think, was just something that it's not that they physically couldn't have recovered from it, but I think that just the confidence
Mm-hmm.
just wasn't there to
Sure.
recover from it well. Uh
And that's tough to
yeah.
like to be set back, and I don't know, um, like if it was just a lot of debt that was incurred. My parents, we were like
Mhm.
really poor for seventh grade. My dad missed. He was out of work for like 6 months. He had to have
Mhm.
a major bypass surgery, and so he was out of work
Yeah.
from six for like 6 months. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you go down, when the main breadwinner, not that my mom didn't work, but stops working, that's a huge
Mhm.
chunk of it. And in retrospect, my parents were never ones to even think about getting government assistance. In
Mhm.
retrospect, I think my parents even said, "Well, we could have probably applied for Social Security disability for that 6 months, and that would have really
Yeah.
helped out."
Would have
But
been
my
good.
but my mom was just like, "Well, we'll live off credit cards, we'll
Yeah.
refinance and take out another mortgage against the house, well, all this kind of stuff." But then from seventh grade on through probably high school, it was just like poor, poor. I mean, like it was like really
Yeah.
scanty, Christmases. Debt collectors calling all the time, and in the olden days, like it was always, if that's a debt collector, tell him I'm not here. Like
Yeah.
and it's just like that's what it was, and uh,
Yeah.
and my mom was working 3 jobs even when my dad went back to work to just try to get out of. Yeah, so that's tough. That's kind of a trauma in and of itself.
Yeah, it was like the expenses of just getting and furnishing a new place to live,
Yeah,
starting with one suitcase to try to like have enough of all the supplies for your family, without any warning. But it was also my medical bills.
yeah,
Obviously, we didn't have any health insurance when we had just come back,
right.
and then there were periods of time where like looking for employment, stuff like that. So yeah, it was a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's tough. Again, I understand the logistics of it. It's like once you're no longer a missionary with New Tribes Mission, you're not a missionary with New Tribes Mission. There's just like,
Right.
you kind of like, and I'm not suggesting that your parents should have or did feel any kind of like um animosity or anything, but it's just kind of
Hmm.
like you have these people who like followed God's calling and were in to then come back,
Yeah.
and it's like, where was the church should have taken care of them. They should, like, but I'm
Yeah.
sure all the support just went away because like, well, you're not a missionary anymore,
Yeah.
so we're going to give money to somebody
Yeah.
else,
There's
which, you know,
definitely an abandonment there. I think the feeling from both the church and from God of like we were there for you. We
Yeah.
were doing the Christian hero thing,
Yeah.
and then we're just at the bottom of the barrel of, barely getting by. It's just,
Yeah.
it smarts a bit, I think.
Yeah. 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 No, that's tough. And that's we were just going through Job on our Friday night house church, and
Mm,
that's one of the things that it's really tough. It's suffering obviously is hard, and God is not opposed to us being angry or upset or
mhm.
questioning or whatever. Like God gets that. But there's an element to where it's like, we do think like, well, God, I served you. I should be getting taken care of. And like
Yeah.
when you really look at the overarching message of Job, that's the voice of Satan. And again, I'm not saying that
Yeah.
that
Yeah, it
people are
is,
wrong to
right?
think that, but that's what Satan is saying is, you should get good stuff if you're serving God. And
Right.
ultimately, like the message at the end is like God is just basically like, well, do you trust me enough to not know what's
Mhm.
going on behind the scenes?
Yeah.
And not that that's easy to swallow. I'm sure it wasn't easy for Job to swallow. It probably took him a few decades to sit down and write that story. But so okay, so you come back and
Yeah.
you guys kind of leave New Tribes Mission. What was when you were there as an MK? Were you in your parent? You didn't go off to like a, a missionary kid boarding school, right? Were you there with your parents the whole time?
Yeah, so my parents were teachers at the boarding school.
Oh,
So a
okay,
lot of my friends were boarding school kids, at least the first
gotcha.
time. But we wanted to get a placement in the tribes,
Yeah,
but we were still in that, like, learning the language,
yeah.
learning the way of things. And my parents were both certified teachers, so
Oh,
it made sense for them to teach at the school.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and even that, you look at that and you just think, well, that's imagine your parents, I'm sure, probably found comfort in the fact that, well, at least our kids are here with us.
Right.
Missionaries' kids were not with them. Like it's just like, all right,
Yeah.
kids are. I mean, the internet existed, but there was no, social media
It
that,
was a lot
yeah,
harder
yeah,
to the kids who were boarded at the boarding schools. There was a sadness there that they
mm,
didn't get to be with their parents. And the trauma for them that first time when their parents were up in the tribes trying to figure out how to get back
right,
through the battle line, was a lot. I
yeah,
remember talking to several of them about it.
yeah, okay, yeah. So now your parents, you said your dad is your dad still a pastor?
No, they moved away from that place where he had a pastorate, but he does frequently still speak and
Okay.
fills in a local church. But his side thing has always been painting houses, so he
Oh,
he does
nice,
that primarily. And my mom teaches at a private school, a Christian school.
nice, nice. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and again, it's exciting to hear your story because again, missionary kids are, I don't want to say weird.
They are weird.
They're a different breed. They're like
They are.
they are. I mean, the MKs at the Bible school were like savages. They were,
Hmm. Wild kids.
sacrificing
Yeah.
raccoons in the basement and stuff. It just crazy
Yeah.
stuff. And it's just like, so you hear that, and it is shocking because it, you you don't think about that. You just think like, okay, they're, especially New Tribes Mission. I know they try as best as possible to immerse you into that culture.
Hmm.
And if you're an MK, you start to think and act and talk, and I mean, you view
Hmm.
yourself as one of those people. Especially if you're born there, if you're born into that
Yeah.
culture, it's a unique perspective, and I was excited to hear it. And again, it was just shocking to me to when we crossed paths in person
Yeah.
to know, oh, this person is. I mean, this was all happening basically about the time I was at the Bible school. So, um, I'm sure if I could remember back, maybe people listening who went to the Bible school with me say, I remember hearing about that there was just chaos going on and
Yeah.
in that area of the world at the time. I have a horrible memory. I can't remember what I ate for dinner yesterday, so I certainly don't remember it. But well, Abby, I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you sharing just your experience. I would
Hmm.
love to have you on again. I would love to, maybe you and PJ both. We can come back and talk. I mean,
Yeah.
PJ and I, of course, we talked about Nephilim and stuff, and got a little crazy. So I'm glad that this one was a little bit more grounded, which is
Yeah.
strange
It's
to
just
think of.
war zones and
Just war
it's
zones and,
fine.
and missionary kids and bombs getting getting blown
Yeah.
up. So, but yeah, I appreciate you coming on, and hope to have you on again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Alrighty. And again, people, thank you for tuning in. And if you have not subscribed, liked, do all of that great stuff. And again, if you want to support the ministry, you can text discipleship to 41444, or you can go to infaith.org/Dennis-Southerby. Check out Conspiracy Pilled with Abby and PJ, and have a good one. While Faith in Focus is a ministry of mine as a missionary within faith, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast or lived out by guests on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of In Faith as a mission.